Hello. So today I'm just going to jump right into it. I am meeting my professor tonight and we're going to talk about parameters that go into the modeling software that I'm using for my master's. So we talked a lot last meeting and determined that what my next step needs to be is to understand what are all the parameters associated in the model, like what are all the parameters that I'm going to have to input into the model, and basically try to determine where they're going to come from. Are there certain ones that I won't necessarily validate with any measurements, but I'm just going to take data from the literature? Or are there ones that I will be able to validate with measurements and different things like that? I just want to try to explain infiltration to you, just to try to figure out how to explain it in a simple way, a way that anyone could understand. And because there's a lot to this process, you sort of have to understand where to start from. So when I'm explaining it to someone, where should I start from? So I'm going to start with the fact that there are a few different methods to calculate infiltration in a hydrologic model. However, I'm going to focus on one method, which is the one that the engineers before me who worked on the model selected. So they selected a certain method, which is one that is used a lot because it has a good balance between simplicity but also capturing appropriately the infiltration process. So I think that's always something that people are trying to go for. How can you calculate the most required amount of a process while still keeping it as simple as possible, right? So for the Horton method, the main aspects associated with this method is that the infiltration into the ground is represented by an exponential equation, which was developed. So if you did see my computer, you could see that there's a graph that was produced with the exponential curve, and it is drawn on the precipitation graph. So you have bars on it that represent how much precipitation has fallen, so intensity, and then you have the exponentially decreasing graph that represents the infiltration. Now, this actual function or model was developed more so for a situation where your rain intensity is actually always above the infiltration rate. So that means that over time, let's say your rain intensity remains above the infiltration, the base. So there's two important values in this. There's a few important values in this equation that you're gonna have to determine and put into your model. So the first one is what's the maximum value infiltration? What's the maximum infiltration capacity of your soil? So this means, let's say you have a soil that's completely dry and it has been dried out for a little while. That represents your maximum. So the quickest value that speed with which water can percolate through the soil. Now, after that, we have the minimum value. So what's interesting is that this minimum value, so this graph will actually tend towards a minimum infiltration value, which is often or closely related to the actual saturated hydraulic conductivity of the soil. So that is related to that. And then you also have your decay constant. So this actually gives the graph its shape. So this sort of influences how quickly your infiltration graph will decay. So those are important parameters. Now that's it. So let's say your rain intensity is above the infiltration rate at all times along this graph. your infiltration rate will decay by a certain factor over time. That is what this method proclaims. Now, this kind of causes a problem, because what if it's not the case? What if your intensity, rain intensity, is actually below the infiltration rate curve? What do you do? So this is why in the model, the SWIM model, they used a way to alter, or they modified the method. And in order to do this, they actually took the integral of the equation, which will actually give you the area under the curve. So the integral will give you the area under the curve, and with that, you're going to be able to basically make the program understand that it's possible that at times the amount that's raining is smaller, so the height of water raining is actually smaller than the height of water the potential height of water that can be infiltrated can be bigger than the height of rainwater falling. Now, so that's what the integral allows you to take into account. And it would be nice to know how that's actually used, but that's kind of going into more specifics. So that's it. So then the next process is to understand where they get their values for the max, min, and decay constant. So that's when you would actually use this document, environment, from the Canadian environment, from the Government of Canada, the environment. So it's actually called the quantitative evaluation of runoff, so hydrological aspects associated with that. So inside this document, you actually have a long explanation of the Horton method, and it does give you and it does say that ideally you would be measuring on the site what are these values. However, again, a lot of the time it's kind of hard to get these accurate values on site depending on the project and the situation. So you would actually, it is possible to go take these values from the literature. So you can actually pull these values from the literature. And so let's say for the project I'm working on, they use the model prior to construction. So during the design phase of the model, they needed to have values for the Horton, because they need to model the rainfall before they construct. So how are they going to figure out what those values are if they don't even necessarily know what the soil is going to be or different things like that? They're going to use this type of document that actually has values from the literature. So let's say we consider the initial. So, okay, let's say we consider the minimum value. So that is dependent on the type of soil. So you have 4 types of soil, A, B, C, or D. And these are characterized somewhere. Where are they characterized? I think they're characterized in my other document. So if I go to my document that actually the manual, so the actual manual of PC Swim, they actually give you the classification of these soil types. So they classify the soils as A is low runoff potential. So they have really high infiltration rates. B is moderate infiltration rates. So they have moderately well to well drained soils with moderately fine to moderately coarse textures. C is soils having slow infiltration rates when thoroughly rutted and consisting chiefly of soils with a layer that impedes downward movement of water. And D is high runoff potential. So these are soils having very slow infiltration rates, and they're mostly made of clays with a high swelling potential, which I know about that because I did a project on that, and a permanent high water table. Wow, that's very interesting. So you have your classification of soils. So I'm going to put that in my little document that I'm presenting to my professor. You know that? And that's going to allow you to decide. So you think about your soil. You think about the area that you're in. What type of soil do you think there's going to be, right? So based on that, you can then go out and determine what are, like, again, we're using the literature. So let's say you determine that you have a spot where it's soil B. You can go to all the other tables and they'll have those values for the Horton method for soil B, right? It's very helpful. I do appreciate these people who have done that. I really do. And this is actually fun. Anyways, I don't want this video to get too long, but that's just to give you an idea of what I'm working on. Now, I hope you learned something. I know nobody's going to see this, mostly for me, but that's what I'm working on, and it's actually rather interesting, which is nice. So, thank you very much. Bye.